Hi, everybody. Welcome to the press. Great to have you here with us for our first of three shows dedicated to the 2025 Masters. I am Ryan Ballingy. We've got a lot to get through. We've got a lot of material to cover over the next 3 days, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Today, we'll start with the basics. We're going to go over the tournament. We'll go over the field, full field betting odds. We'll talk about the model, horses for courses, changes to Augusta National, all of those good things. We'll give you a good foundation. Then tomorrow, we'll get a little bit more into the weeds as we typically do on our second show of the week. We'll talk about the stuff we've talked about on the show to reiterate it, surround it with more information around first round leader plays, international plays, what we're looking at in terms of strokes gained trends, and then some long term information, long term trends about the Masters. And then our third show, which we would typically dedicate to everything else, will also be about the Masters. That'll be about matchups, derivative plays, prop bets, weather forecasting, first round leader as well, some stuff like that to kind of bring it all together. So all Masters all week. Hopefully you're here to enjoy it. Let's get right into everything. We're talking about the Masters. 2025 Masters, we got a 96-player field taking on Augusta National Golf Club in Augusta, Georgia. The Alistair McKenzie Masterpiece opened in 1933. It plays to a scorecard length this year of 7,555 yards. Par 72, as you know. The expected purse is probably $20 million. Could be higher. It's not going to be lower. It could be higher this year. It was $20 million last year. They announced that purse on Saturday after the cut is made. Again, top 50 in ties make the cut, not your typical PGA Tour event, which is 65 in ties. Of course, we have a 96-player field, so we're dealing with a smaller group of players compared to regular PGA Tour events, outside the signature events, and every major championship, which is 156. 750 FedEx Cup points to the winner. So, that all said, let's take a look at the top of the table. Top 24 names. Again, got a 96-player field. Makes it really handy to have 24 players on each graphic. Let's take a look at the top of the table. Scotty Scheffler in the offshore books plus 475. I've seen this price vacillate between 450, 500. But let's just say 9-2 for argument's sake and for computation's sake. That's what we're looking at this week. So if you think about that in the realistic prospect of him winning, right? And you look at Rory McIlroy as well, because he's 7-1. We'll pair those two players together. And this is a conversation a lot of people are going to have this week. Do you bet either of the two favorites, knowing that they are two of the three best players in golf statistically? Colin Morikawa is part of that list as well, so we'll include him in this conversation, just to a degree. But do you bet Scheffler and McIlroy, knowing McIlroy's got 2 wins at Pebble and the Players? He's never done that in his career before April. You've got Scheffler, who is a 2-time champion here. He's third best on the PGA Tour in strokes gained in the aggregate. Yes, he hasn't won this year. No, I don't really care about that. But do you want to consider betting either of those players at these prices? And the one thing I want to underscore about the Masters market is it is the biggest handle market of the year in golf. None of the other majors get even all that close. And certainly the PGA Tour from week to week doesn't get all that close. You're not going to get a lot of great value at the top, particularly shorter than 20-1, really shorter than 25-1. You're not going to get a lot of great value, as you're going to see here over the course of this conversation. So you've got to think about that specifically for these two players, and probably Morikawa, who I think is probably the most logical bet of the three best players at the statistical top of the leaderboard, so to speak, this season on the PGA Tour. You can entertain a market without. There's markets without Scheffler and McIlroy. We'll talk about a couple of guys over the course of this show that you may want to entertain in both markets or one or the other, particularly guys that are longer than 50, 60-1. And you also have to know that you need to move quickly on those guys that are a little bit longer. We're not going to get to everybody that is a valuable long shot here in this first graphic, but a great example this morning, Kenny Kim, who does the Fantasy Golf Degenerate show. He's fantastic. Him and Byron do a fantastic job over there, and they're funny as hell. They're not as serious as I am about this. Well, they are, but not about the conversation. And what Kenny posted was, hey, I was trying to bet Sepp Straka, who's on this graphic, at 70-1. He was trying to bet him at 70-1. I think it was at DK, and then it went to 60-1 as he was trying to bet it. So I know I like Sepp Straka this week. I'll explain why a little bit, why that's the case. But I went to go bet him, and I went to go find a better price for him if I could. I found him at Caesars for 80-1. I had no money in my Caesars account. I rarely use Caesars except to live bet darts when I'm in New York, because they're the only people that give me good live odds on darts. And so I went into the deposit phase and did all that stuff, put in $40 because I just wanted to bet one position on SEP and get out of there. And in the process of all that, which took like 3 minutes, the market went from 80 to 65. And as I was placing the bet, it moved to 65. And I thought, okay, probably my chance is gone. That stinks. Well, instead, I moved over to Fanatics. They had him at 81. I took the full position with Fanatics. FanDuel still had him at 81. I didn't want to take the chance. And again, you're talking about FanDuel and DraftKings, big books. They do the most money by far. It's not even close, right? So unless you're at a sharp book like Circa, you want to kind of find your best odds in those. Caesars, BetMGM typically has bad odds, but maybe you get one there. Sometimes you do. Bet365, Fanatics, ESPN Bet also typically has horrible odds, but maybe you get something decent there. But you've got to move quickly today. No worse than tomorrow, because people are going to start to hear these conversations. There's a lot of conversation about this tournament this week. If you hear that enough times and you're on the book side, you're going to go, all right, well, the action is going to come in. We may preemptively move it, or we're going to get that action. Someone's going to be out in front of you, and then you're not going to get that price. So move quickly on those longer shot guys. For McIlroy, Scheffler, they're not going to get much shorter. I think you could see McIlroy get to 5-1 if a lot of money came in on him. I think Morikawa at worst moves to 14 or 12-1. There are some books that have him at 12 and 14-1 because they are trying to crowd you, knowing he's a great player, and they know you, that's really the best alternative available. That all said, I think it's important to highlight before we go through the rest of this graphic the most important metrics in determining the Masters champion, and they've been the most reliable, really, for 20 years in one case, 10 years in another, I think 13 in another. So lots to think about here, but these are three rules I would absolutely follow in trying to determine a Masters winner. The first and foremost is that in 18 of the last 20 years, excluding 2018 with Patrick Reed and Hideki Matsuyama in 2021, the Masters champion has gained 1.5 strokes per round in the aggregate in the calendar year of which that Masters tournament is played. So for the 3 months plus a week in this case of this year, the players who have gained an average of 1.5 strokes total per round is 8 guys. 8. McIlroy, Scheffler, Morikawa, those are the top 3. Morikawa is actually second. You've got Joaquin Niemann on LIV. He's the one and only LIV player. He never has a top 10 in the major, but he's on that list. You've got Shane Lowry, Russell Henley, Sepp Straka, and Tommy Fleetwood. Tommy Fleetwood's never won in this country, right? That's a question mark. You can start to kind of winnow out guys with another metric. So I think this is the Fantasy Grind who posted this is a good mark as well. 10 of the last 10 Masters champions posted a top 13 finish or better in the preceding 4 majors. So in the last year, you had a T13 somewhere in a major. Well, that knocks out Straka and that knocks out Niemann. Now you've got 6 guys if you want to use those parameters. Ron Kloss, who does a great job with the rabbit hole at BetSperts, he has an interesting graphic. He has a little bit wider of a list, but it gives you a chance to cast a little bit wider of a net. And that is that those players on his list have gained in the aggregate 18 strokes tee to green in their preceding 4 tournaments going into the Masters. So nowadays that obviously includes the players, that includes Valspar. Maybe you got a couple starts in there. So are you someone who's gained in the aggregate 18 strokes or more? And there are about 15, 16 guys who fit that list, and pretty much everybody that we just talked about in those first couple of metrics is on that list. They all are. So that doesn't sound, it sounds surprising. It's not surprising, right? Or it's the other way. The best players are playing the best golf, and they're the most likely to win the major. I know that's shocking, right? But in a universe where you're looking for long shots, that gives you some cover to go look at guys like a Shane Lowry at a 40-1, like a Russell Henley at that price, like Sepp Straka, who have now multiple positions on at different numbers, 80 and 65, but he's 70 at this offshore book, like a Corey Connors, who fits Ron's bill of that metric. He's actually second in that metric, 65-1, and is a legitimate horse for course play, plays this place very well. But then you look at the in-betweens of these numbers, and you say, okay, well, John Rahm hasn't finished worse than 9th so far on LIV this year, and that was his worst finish last week. Does that mean anything to you? Does a top 10 mean something to you? Does a top 5 on LIV mean something to you? That's up to you to decide. Do you look at someone like Justin Thomas, who's just outside of that 1.5 strokes gained metric, just like Hideki was in 2021. Do you look at that number? Brooks Koepka's done everything in the Masters but win it. He's finished everywhere in the top 5, basically, including runner-up. He's had chances to win. He played pretty well so far on Live this year. T18 last week, which whatever, doesn't tell me a whole lot. Won a couple of times in the year between. He is a 5-time major champion. He plays this place particularly well. 33 to 1 is an interesting price to me for Brooks Koepka, but he doesn't fit any of the metrics I just talked about. So now we're having to have conversations about guys who are interesting to bet, but don't fit any of these metrics we've talked about beyond the other obvious ones of no first timers. You don't bet the guy who won the week prior. Sorry, Brian Harmon. You don't bet someone over 45 years old unless they're Jack Nicklaus. You don't bet an amateur player. Those easy maxims you can just winnow the field out pretty quickly, right? So then you get into the Joaquin Niemann of the world. 2 wins on Live this year. Never a top 10 in a major. Do you follow that advice of that he's been a great player so far? He's got 3 wins. You also throw in the Saudi International. Do you throw that in there, or do you just scuttle that all because he's never proven himself in a major championship? Patrick Cantlay. Horrible putting weekend at TPC San Antonio, but a great PGA Tour player. Some good finishes in this tournament. Russell Henley, Shane Lowry, they fit the bill. Jordan Spieth. Do you the Jordan Spieth experience? You want to get on that train for the next 4 days? I don't, but you might. I don't see any reason to. I'd much rather bet Minwoo Lee at 45 to 1, who doesn't fit any of the things we just talked about, but he's been playing great and he's having his best year in just one. And he won on a golf course that is similar in length to Augusta National and has some vexing greens in the not exactly the same way, but a similar way to Augusta National. Tommy Fleetwood fits the bill. You're going to bet a guy who's never won in America. That's a tough one. Victor Hovland at 45 to 1, you're looking at a golf course that can kind of suit him. We don't typically talk about course fits on this first episode, but if you look at the kind of strokes gained breakdown of who succeeds at Augusta National, it's not guys who putt good. It's guys who have a fantastic approach game, and I mean that they get the vast majority of their strokes gained from that. The majority of the tee to green portion, about 40% of their strokes gained on the approach. If that's you, you are a guy I like this week. Well, guess who fits that bill? Victor Hovland, because he putts very poorly and he has a poor short game. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, given that if you 3-putt more than once in a Masters tournament, you lose. And some guys that are on this list you think of are going to do that really quickly, like a Victor Hovland or a Will Zalatoris. But if he flushes it enough and just kind of avoids the bad spots, maybe he's interesting. I don't like him at this price, but there you go. Robert McIntyre is a guy in my research is kind of surprising to me. 60 to 1, has been playing well. Lefties have a thing for Augusta National. I could see a lot of upside to Bob McIntyre here. It's not sexy or exciting. It doesn't fit any of the other metrics. But if I were thinking honestly, I would put him in consideration. I would think about Cam Smith, because if we're thinking about horses for courses, and this is the only major where you can have true horses for courses, Cam Smith's one of your guys. So is Patrick Reed. We'll talk about him later. But he's been there. He's been there a lot at the Masters tournament. He's not the same guy he was 3 years ago. Not by a long shot. Not the same guy he was 5 years ago. But he seems to have an affinity for this golf course. Australians tend to anyhow. Talked about Straka. I will probably pass on Hatton. For as great as he was last year on Live, it doesn't seem to quite manifest itself in the same way so far this year on Live. Now, with all that said, we've gone through half the show. Let's talk about the model top 10 for this week. So we do a model every week for those of you who aren't regular listeners or watchers of the show. It's available in full to our members at golfnewsnet.com. $40 for 1 year, $70 for 2 years, $100 for 3 years. It's also $10 for 7 days. So if you just want to have it for this week, you can have it. Cancel your membership. I won't be offended. But here's the top 10 we give out for free. Scotty Scheffler, number 1. Rory McIlroy, number 2. Colin Morikawa, number 3. Bryson DeChambeau, 4th. Xander Schauffele, 5th. Brooks Koepka, 6th. Hideki Matsuyama, 7th. Tommy Fleetwood, 8th. Shane Lowry, 9th. Patrick Cantlay, 10th. Now, my model is based on longer-term windows, 1 and 2 year windows with different weighting, and also 1 and 2 year windows where we compare a player's performance against the quality of their competition. And then We include the last 3 years at the Masters, and we include the last 10 PGA Tour events or live events in this case played. So, all that said, I don't think this is a shocking top 10, other than that Straka and Henley are not in it, right? I mean, of the other players we talked about, are the ones that have the chance to win based on historic criteria, we've got 5 of them on this list, right? Neiman just doesn't play well enough in the non-live events to get in this list. Straka is a little too variable, but he's having his best year this year. And then Henley's having a fantastic year already. He would qualify in a shorter term model, which we will talk about in the second show. So I don't think any of these guys are particularly surprising, right? But I want to have that out there, just kind of what the long term data tells us. Now let's take a look at potential horses for courses. We've mentioned a lot of these guys already, but there are a lot of them, and there's a tournament that we played last weekend where there are hardly any. Now we've got a whole ton of them. This graphic last week was 5 guys. Now it's 12, 13 guys on this list. And these are guys who have had multiple top 15 finishes in the Masters in the last 5 years. Now, one of the reasons why we have this number of guys, is that it's the same course every year. The same guys tend to get invited back. And if you play this thing often enough, and you're better than most of the people who get in, like we said, the older players, the amateurs, first timers, once you become a multi-timer, start to kind of get the hang of this thing. Maybe you figure out a way to top 15 that's a little bit easier than your average PGA Tour event, live event, major championship, right? But still, these are guys to think about. Experience matters. Scheffler, McIlroy, Koepka, Xander, Corey Connors. Corey Connors is a sleepy pick. I mean, if you have not picked up a position on Corey Connors, just have a $10 position, have a $5 position, whatever your fractional unit is of choice. I would get on Corey Connors as a bet for this week. Max Homa, I would not bet him. Jordan Spieth, Colin Morikawa, John Rahm, Patrick Reed. Patrick Reed showed up out of nowhere last week. Well, he played pretty well a couple of events ago on Live, but showed up out of nowhere at the Miami event, had a great week putting. He is kind of the guy that flies in the face of the statistical modeling of who does well at Augusta National, because he dominated the par fives the year he won in 2018, but he continues to show up and play very well. He seems to have something he likes about these greens. The otherwise overall performance is kind of blah relative to these guys, especially, but it's there. Cam Smith, Cam Young is 185 to 1 to 200 to 1, depending on the book. He's never won the PGA Tour, and he hasn't played especially well. However, that it's a bet almost worth making for $5 just to say you had the ticket, or $1 just to say you had the ticket. Again, your fractional number. We talked about Will Zalatoris, horrible putter. I mean, truly horrible putter, and that's why I don't really consider him a threat to win. But he's a flusher, and he has shown some signs of being interesting. I just think his price is way too short. Let's look at the past champions, going back to Patrick Reed in 2018. Working backwards, Scheffler, 2 of the last 3 with John Rahm in between, Hideki Matsuyama in 2021. Dustin Johnson won here in November 2020, setting the 72-hole scoring record, which I think should have an asterisk to it. And then you've got Tiger Woods in 19 and Patrick Reed in 18. Tiger's not competing, as you know. What does this tell you? Well, a lot of these guys gain their strokes off the tee and on the approach. This isn't a putter's tournament. I mean, John Rahm has a good putter. Hideki doesn't. Dustin's marginal. Tiger's an all-time great. Reed's a great putter. But at least in the last 5 years, you look at players for the most part who beat the crap out the ball, tee to green, and then they find a way to dominate the par fives against their peers and not to make mistakes, especially in Scheffler's case. And we'll double underscore. You don't want guys who 3-putt. If you 3-putt more than once, you will lose the tournament. Historically, that's the way that it works. Another thing to throw in here that we will bring up again, but the other maxim I think is really important, is to know about after round 1. In the last 20 Masters played, all 20 of them, the champion was in the top 11 or ties after round 1. Every single one of them. So, after round 1 is a great opportunity to look at live betting some guys. I would even argue that if you think one of those players that's outside the things we talked about pre-tournament, your 1.5 strokes gained, your top 13 in a major, your tee to green number. If someone outside that list for whatever reason, or buried on that list, and you don't have them already, if they are in contention 15 holes into the round, 14 holes into the round to be in that top 11, you may want to get a price on them quick, especially if they're kind of on the outskirts, because otherwise that market's going to move. There's, again, a maturity to this market that knows what the history of the tournament tells us, and they're going to move quickly. So you need to move quickly this week if you are interested in good prices, and I hope that you are. Now let's move to a little bit past the 70 to 1, folks. Right now we're looking into the high double digits, into the triple digits. Sergio Garcia won 2 times on LIV since the last time we saw him at the Masters. Played well last weekend. He stumbled on Sunday at Doral, but he has been playing well. Jason Day is kind of interesting. Patrick Reed, certainly interesting. Phil Mickelson out of nowhere, right? I mean, he started to play some good golf recently. Am I going to bet a 54-year-old man to win the Masters? No, but maybe you want to bet him on a top 20. I think that there's a philosophical conversation to be had this week about whether you try to go for the win ticket or do you spread your bets out a whole lot. I don't view the Masters as the most profitable week of my year by any stretch because of the maturity of the market. If you can win a bunch of smattering of bets, you can have a good week, but I try to kind of limit losses knowing that the value is really not there, right? And that the only chance you have a killer week is if someone that's a long shot wins. We haven't had a long shot win. I mean, I guess you would consider a Decky a long shot at 45 to 1. But before that, a triple digit long shot, you're looking at Charles Schwartzel in 2011. So it's been a while. It's been a minute. Now, Reed wasn't an obvious choice, right? Sergio wasn't an obvious choice. He'd never won a major. So we've had less obvious choices in the last decade, but not many of them in the last, really one in the last 5 years. And Tiger was playing great, but not expected to win at 45 years old. So know that you got to have that philosophy dead set. Do you go after a Dustin Johnson who's shown life? Do you go after a Brian Harman who won? I mean, history tells you there's only 2 guys in the modern era who have done it, between Sandy Lyle in 88 and Phil Mickelson in 06. Is Brian Harman going to become a multiple-time major champion at the Masters? I think that's hard to say in the definitive. You got Matt McNeely at 150 to 1. Kind of flies in the face of what you want of a guy who's not got a ton of major experience. So, but he had a great week in Texas. Do you go after a hot hand of a guy that didn't win in Texas? Do you think about a Tom Hoagie who will be on the next graphic at a 250 to 1 price? Again, I think you have to worry about getting the temptation to go after too many guys. That's why I try to stick to these maxims and just bet them and then get something live. You kind of get yourself into trouble thinking, well, this guy had a good week last week, but it doesn't fit anything else. That's why I'm not betting Ludwig Aubert, because he doesn't fit anything. He doesn't fit any of the maxims that I think about in terms of winning, except 1 T13 finish or better. But I'm still not convinced he doesn't fit. Doesn't check other boxes for me. That's the problem. Looking at JJ Spawn, fabulous year, playoff runner-up at the Players, good year, another runner-up or another second place finish at the Cognizant Classic. It's been a fabulous year for him. I don't think this place sets up well for him, but 200 to 1 may convince you otherwise, right? Sungjae Im has a decent record at this tournament. A couple of top 15 finishes in the last 5 years. Not playing his best golf, 200 to 1. He's going to fly under the radar. You would probably be one of very few people who bet him this week. Going even deeper than that, there's your Cam Young, 225 to 1 on an offshore book. Do you want to go after that price knowing he's got a good course history, hits the crap out of the ball, gains all of his strokes from tee to green, and really can't chip or putt that well? It's up to you. But if he's 1 under through 5 on Thursday, that price is cut in half, and maybe you're interested. So keep an eye on someone like that. Michael Kim's been playing fabulous golf. He has cooled off, and I'm glad he's in the Masters. He played well. He earned it. Taylor Pendrith really interests me more for Quail Hollow in the U.S. Open than for here. But the way that he plays tee to green and having a good finish in Houston, it doesn't convince me because he doesn't check a lot of boxes. But he is someone to keep an eye on, perhaps. Think about Tom Hoagie we just talked about, 250 to 1. Charles Schwartzel just showed up on LIV out of nowhere, played well at Miami, 325 to 1. I'm not betting him, but just a guy to keep an eye on. Maybe a Christian Bezadenhout. I like him as actually a first round leader play. We'll get that into that later in the week. But 350 to 1 number overall. I'm not thinking about him to win. I'm thinking about him for maybe an FRL at best, maybe a top 20 bet. But looking at the numbers, we'll talk about that tomorrow. He does do well in first rounds, particularly at this property. Then you start to kind of get into deep, dark, scary territory, 400 to ones or deeper. Joe Highsmith, the Kevin Yu guys who are like, "Hey, I'm happy to be here." Don't bet them to win. Um, go into the next group of folks, and this is the last group of folks we're going to talk about. This is all 96 guys in the field. Notice you've got a lot of past champions and amateurs that are sitting there at super, super long odds. Jose Maria Olazabal, Mike Weir, 5,000 to 1. It's not happening. Fred Couples, 3,000 to 1. If Houston wins the national championship tonight, maybe 2 people will put $1 on him. But take Rafa Campos, who's just happy to be here, 2001. Bernhard Langer, who is nearly 70 years old, playing his 41st and final Masters this year, has better odds than a guy who won on the PGA Tour in the last calendar year, in the last 12 months. Just think about that. That's interesting. Angel Cabrera just won on the PGA Tour Champions. Again, I'm not telling you to bet the guy, but he did just win. I don't think you would feel good placing a bet on a guy who served a 20-month prison sentence for domestic abuse and threatening violence against his partner, but there you are if you would like to have that opportunity. Other than that, Brian Campbell, shortest hitter on the PGA Tour, very happy to be here, 800 to 1. Chris Kirk, 450 to 1, is mildly interesting because Chris Kirk's played okay in this tournament in the past. Not to win, but maybe for a top 20, you could get some interesting money on him there at that price. Matt McCarty, Nick Dunlap, Bubba Watson, Adam Shea, just guys who are in the tournament because of this reason or that. I would not touch anyone with a 25-foot pole to win on this graphic, but I might consider a Chris Kirk top 20 bet. So that's the lay of the land. That is the first pass through our 96 player field. Tomorrow we will look through a whole lot of more data. And that's really what you need to look at when you're making bets in mature markets. Data that gives you a slight edge. We'll talk about first round leader plays. We'll talk about plays around nationalities. We'll talk about current form. We'll talk about variance. Lots of different things that will help us dial things in a little bit better. Thank you so much for watching the show or listening if you catch it as a podcast. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Golf News Net, or you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is called Golf News Net Radio. It's just audio versions of all of our podcasts, including this one. So if you just kind of like to listen to podcasts the old-fashioned way, you can do that there or on your podcasting service of choice. Watch this show on Golf News Net TV, which is available 24/7 on the Golf News Net app on Roku and Amazon Fire, as well as on Freecast, Free Life Sports, and Zine. Thank you so much for your time and catching us either live or after the fact. We'll be back tomorrow. We're going to have a great week, everybody. We're going to make some money this week, and we're going to help you do it right here on The Press. Have a good one, everybody.